The music world was shocked when 75-year-old André Rieu, the king of the Waltz, collapsed during a performance. Everything changed after that moment. But what caused him to fall at the peak of his success? To understand, we need to look at his whole life story. André Rieu was born on October 1st, 1949. He grew up in a family where parents cared more about rules than about their kids' happiness. He was the third of 6 children. His father used his conductor's stick to control the house just like he controlled musicians on stage. His father's name was also André. He was a famous conductor that orchestras looked up to, but at home the children were scared of him. There were no bedtime songs in their home, no laughter. Love felt distant and cold. "My parents didn't love me," André would later say. He said it calmly, like he was just stating a fact. His mother only cared about good grades and skills. She thought imagination was bad. When a teacher said nice things about his creativity, she yelled at him about it at home. Being creative was seen as weakness, not something good. But when he turned 5 years old, everything changed. A thin, graceful 18-year-old became his teacher. She was his first violin teacher. She didn't yell at him. She helped him learn to feel the music. When she moved her bow, young André discovered something he had never felt before: freedom. It wasn't love, it wasn't romance, just a feeling that made him feel alive. And he was absolutely amazed. That's when he fell in love with music, that powerful feeling. It wasn't winning. It was the beginning of something that would grow deep inside him. Other kids just practiced their scales. He searched for something more special, but this happiness came with a price. When he was a teenager, his love for waltzes didn't match what his father wanted. At home, his beautiful music style was hated. "I didn't raise you to play waltzes," his father yelled at him. Those words didn't just criticize his music style, they tried to destroy his spirit. The final blow came around 1968 when Marjorie came into his life, André's chosen partner, not someone his parents picked. His mother was furious when she met her. "Leave," she commanded, one rejection after another. That same night, André left home. He never went back. Their home stayed empty, like a shell, even as he became famous. His parents didn't go to his concerts, not even once. Even though huge arenas were filled with fans who loved him, the silence from his parents was something he couldn't forget. "I spent years in therapy trying to understand why my childhood felt so empty," he once said. The clapping crowds never filled that empty space, but through music, he finally felt like people could see him. The violin wasn't just an instrument, it was what kept him going. Whenever he played, it felt like windows were opening up. In 1978, after years of formal orchestra work and playing in boring concert halls, André couldn't take it anymore and started a rebellion. He created the Maestro Salon Orchestra, 12 dreamers, no fancy costumes, with lots of hope. These young musicians performed in small community halls, backyard weddings, forgotten border towns. They played music just because they loved music. No critics, no big stages, just sound, shared between humans. That's what people saw on the outside, but inside, there was someone else running everything. It was Marjorie. She was steady, careful, unseen. She handled business meetings, bookings, and quietly wrote arrangements. She was the invisible power behind his visible magic. When he wasn't sure about buying an old, falling-apart castle, she said, "Sell more records." Not because she was curious, but to build their future. This quiet revolution wasn't on TV. It spread by word of mouth. In 1987, he officially started the Johann Strauss Orchestra. 12 musicians, but with a bold mission to bring music's heartbeat back. They got rid of serious formality. Instead of black tailcoats, they wore colors, inviting joy. Their 1988 New Year's Day first show, filled with dancing lights and happy melodies, was electric. Critics laughed at them, but audiences came in huge numbers. They weren't just attending a concert, they were taking music back. By 1995, on one of Europe's biggest stages, the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, something spontaneous and amazing happened. Rieu walked onto the soccer field with his orchestra as Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2 played. Football fans stopped, swayed, and clapped. The stadium lit up with grace. The tension of sports melted away. When Ajax scored, the timing felt magical. The moment became a legend. Overnight, Strauss & Company jumped to number 1 in the Netherlands for 19 weeks. That was something unheard of for classical music. It sold millions around the world. Australia followed right after that. In Melbourne, over 38,000 people filled stadium seats to watch a fairy tale happen in real time. Not only that, they had 8 of the top 10 DVDs in the country. All of them belonged to him. He was on the same level as pop stars like Pink and AC/DC. After all that success, there were still some people who didn't like what he was doing. It was the traditional musicians who were upset. One conductor said angrily, "Musical pornography," making fun of the lights and gowns, saying that joy had no place in art. To Rieu's audiences, however, it meant everything. Dancing families, crying grandparents. Emotion had found its stage. When he said, "With us, you don't feel the serious quiet that drives people away," he meant it. He wasn't selling concerts. He was giving hope to people. But behind the shiny lights and sold-out stadiums, the maestro was breaking down. In 2010, at the peak of his career, a new problem came up. André got hit with a virus infection that attacked his inner ear. For a violinist, balance is everything. His world started spinning. Tours were canceled. Performances called off. The man whose main thing was saying "can do" was forced to say, "I can't." It was more than just being sick. It was a break, one he didn't know he'd been carrying. To be more exact, it was more than sickness. It was the moment when the image people had of him cracked, shown in shaking imbalance and blurred vision. In 2010, at 62, André Rieu was knocked down by a viral infection of the vestibular nerve, an attack on his inner ear that threw him into endless chaos. The room spun, and nothing, not even the ground under him, felt stable. He lay in bed with dizzy eyes looking at walls that spun with cruel motion. The man who had never shaken now felt unanchored. Doctors ordered rest. The tour schedule and the man who was once as solid as a cement wall collapsed like cheap sheet music. André's recovery was very slow. All kinds of normal therapy failed. Then a letter came from an Australian fan. In it, he described his own fight with the same infection and shared balance exercises that helped him get his balance back. André, desperate, followed the advice. Slowly, the spinning came to an end. After months of staying away, he stood again. First shakily, then firmly. With time, he returned to the stage, doing a tour that showed not just a musical comeback, but a recovery of his reputation. Everyone thought he was back to his perfect self, but in reality, no wound, physical or emotional, heals without leaving a mark. The dizziness went away, but his balance stayed weak. In 2012, management was quick to say the balance problems hadn't returned, but accepted the fact that the ear that was attacked stayed a weak spot. They also told people that if the illness had a chance of coming back, he would be in serious danger, especially if he was on stage. Then came 2016 in Leeds on a December tour. The trumpet of sadness sounded again. There was a companion that André kept very close in his heart. He always came along, and his name was Ruud Merckx, who was a trombone player and a longtime friend. Everyone was doing their own thing, but then news hit that he had died in his sleep. It was like a big earthquake in André's world. Without thinking twice, he canceled the Nottingham show mid-tour, then stopped the rest in London, Birmingham, and Glasgow. This wasn't illness. It was grief, unable to be comforted, and final. He later admitted he was like a brother. The orchestra, a family in every way, swayed in mourning. When the music shows came back, it carried the weight of what had disappeared from André's life. Even after all of that, he kept going strong, and in 2019, when a terrible flu covered him in sweats and shaking fever, he took the stage. The smile stayed, but those who knew him saw how he was battling with himself on that stage. Then came the event that would break him completely. In March 2024 in Mexico City, he had to perform at 6 sold-out concerts. It seemed like a promising victory. After just the second performance, things got sharp and turned to crisis. Altitude, jet lag, and flu came together like storm clouds. There were reports that backstage he stumbled. Fever, breathless confusion. He grabbed his phone and called Marjorie with a quiet voice. "I don't want a first concert day like this ever again." 4 concerts ended like that. Over 40,000 ticket holders were angry. The orchestra, all 125 people, were sent home mid-tour. Flights went backwards, tickets refunded, emergency chaos with no way to keep their quiet dignity. In that pause, something new happened. Pierre, his son, stepped forward. He wasn't just a son or tour manager anymore. He became a shield. No more trips across continents that were like marathons. The pace slowed. Europe-only performances, controlled scheduling, sleep, recovery, a soft fortress built around André's health. It wasn't running away. It was the right choice. But if it had been done a bit earlier, they wouldn't have had to face the results of what was about to happen next. In the meantime, everything relied on Pierre, once in charge of planning, who had now become the person who controlled the speed. He put in brakes where André would have pushed forward. Every flight, every venue, now went through a filter. Can he do this without braking? He became the one carrying the weight, allowing André to reclaim his music, not at the cost of himself. That collapse, that decision, rewrote everything. This was not the fall of a maestro. It was the birth of a new one who understood that every note worth playing must be earned, not through pushing yourself too hard, but through care. And in that, he became more human, more unforgettable. By summer 2024, the change was visible. But not all the wounds had healed. André Rieu, now 75, had built his life on the road, and slowing down came with a hidden cost. For decades, the constant movement had been his oxygen. Now with Pierre tightening control, each performance carried a different kind of pressure. The pressure to prove he could still do it, not just for the audience, but for himself. He returned to Maastricht, his hometown stage that July. It was the safest arena in his calendar, the one place where every face in the crowd knew the history behind the man. The concert sold out instantly, as they had for years. But behind the scenes, the preparation was no longer routine. Medical clearances, oxygen available backstage, and rest breaks written into rehearsal blocks. His team once focused on lighting cues and sound balance, now worked with doctors and physical therapists. The audience never saw the checklist taped to the wall of his dressing room. It was a quiet acknowledgement that his body was no longer the silent partner it once was. The list wasn't long, but it was exact. Drink water before stage, limit encore length, no after-show handshakes until heart rate returned to normal. These were rules Pierre enforced with the same seriousness his father had once saved for tempo markings. Yet even with the safety measures, there were moments when the old pace tried to break through. On the third night in Maastricht, he extended a waltz beyond its planned length, lost in the rise of strings. The orchestra followed, the crowd stood, and for a few minutes, it felt like the past. But when he walked off stage, his shirt stuck to him with the same damp heaviness he'd felt in Mexico City. Pierre's expression said what neither wanted to speak out loud. There was still a line, and they had almost crossed it. The changes weren't just physical, they were artistic. André began rearranging certain pieces, lowering the intensity in ways only trained ears would notice. The high-energy polkas became fewer. Ballads, slower waltzes, and orchestral storytelling began to take over the set lists. Fans embraced the change, without realizing it was also a strategy. It was a way to give the illusion of endless stamina while saving the energy it took to deliver it. Between shows, he spent more time at home than he had in decades. Maastricht's stone streets and the garden behind his 15th-century home became his rehearsal hall. Instead of rehearsing for hours with the full orchestra, he practiced privately, keeping his energy bank full for performance days. Friends noticed a softer rhythm to his voice, fewer late-night calls, and a newfound willingness to say no. When André Rieu stepped back onto the stage after his long health battle, the applause was different. It wasn't just a celebration. It was relief. For months, no one knew if the King of the Waltz would perform again. His 2009 viral infection had stopped him mid-tour. Doctors had warned him that pushing too soon could end his career, but walking away from music was never an option for André. The first concert back was in Antwerp. Tickets had sold out before his illness. Many expected a shorter show. Instead, Rieu delivered 3 hours of music without cutting a single number. He greeted his audience with that familiar warmth. Yet the sharp observer noticed the changes. He sat between pieces. He paced himself, and for the first time in decades, his son Pierre was seen at the side of the stage for the entire performance. As you know, Pierre Rieu had been quietly running much of the business during his father's illness. He watched over the production, managed schedules, and made the final call on whether the tour would even start again. Now, he was visibly part of the show's safety net. In later interviews, André admitted Pierre had strict instructions to step in if he showed signs of dizziness. The responsibility was heavy. This was not just about music. This was about his father's health. Midway through the 2010 tour, a special moment happened that fans still talk about. In Maastricht, André paused during the encore and called Pierre to the front of the stage. The crowd roared as Pierre reluctantly stepped into the spotlight. André handed him a microphone and asked him to sing along with the orchestra. Pierre wasn't a professional singer, but the audience didn't care. It was a rare look into their personal bond live for thousands to see. The clip spread quickly online, showing a side of André that rarely appeared in interviews. Not the maestro, but the father. Behind the scenes, the pace was still punishing. André's recovery meant careful scheduling, but the reality of touring left little room for rest. In Brazil, the heat was intense. In Australia, jet lag was brutal. André's team adjusted set lists, making sure the most physically demanding numbers were placed early in the show when his energy was highest. Even then, the risk was always there. A return of his condition could end everything again. Pierre's role grew even larger in those years. He wasn't just managing planning, he became a quiet guardian, making judgment calls that sometimes overruled his father's instincts. André has admitted he sometimes argued with Pierre about slowing down, but he also knew his son's caution was the reason the tour could continue. Fans began to notice subtle changes in André's performance style. There was more audience interaction, more breaks for storytelling between pieces. It wasn't just about saving energy. André was consciously making his concerts more intimate. He wanted the audience to feel part of the journey. All the highs, the fears, the victories. By 2012, the real machine was back in full force. The tours covered continents again. Yet, the shadow of his illness never fully left. André spoke openly in interviews about how it had changed him. He no longer saw himself as invincible. Every performance felt like a gift, not a guarantee.